You're sitting at your desk with your laptop open, phone buzzing beside you, inbox full, tabs stacked across the top of the screen. You glance at your to-do list and feel your chest tighten as your mind jumps between tasks without landing on any of them. 10 minutes pass, then 20, and you haven't started a single thing. You don't like admitting that when there's too much to do, you shut down and do nothing. Here's the interruption you can use today, exactly as written. What is the one task that makes the rest of today easier if it's done? Say it out loud, then circle only one item on your list. In the next 10 minutes, the noise drops. Your breathing slows. The list stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling finite, because your attention finally has somewhere to land. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. This won't rush you, but it will keep you from spiraling. The pain here isn't laziness or lack of discipline. It's overload. Too many tasks compete for your attention at once, and your nervous system reads that as danger. Instead of choosing, you freeze. Instead of progress, you scroll, reorganize, or stare. This is costing you momentum, confidence, and often money or work credibility, because important things stay undone while urgency keeps piling up. What makes this worse is the quiet shame. You know you're capable. You've handled hard days before. But in these moments, capability doesn't help. The list feels heavy, and every choice feels wrong because it means not doing something else. So you delay the choice entirely. By the end of this lesson, you won't magically love your to-do list. What you will have is a way to simplify the day fast, choose one priority without second-guessing, and move forward with less internal resistance. The aim isn't perfect productivity. It's earlier clarity, so the day stops fighting you. If this kind of grounded, practical help is useful, especially when your mind locks up under pressure, these lessons are designed to keep giving you tools you can actually use. Subscribe for more lessons like this. First, you'll learn how to collapse a long list into a single meaningful action without overthinking it. Next, you'll see how to avoid the common trap that keeps you busy but unproductive. Then, you'll practice staying focused when interruptions and new tasks try to pull you off course. Finally, you'll watch how these pieces come together in a real day that starts overwhelmed and ends clearer, but not magically finished. There's a moment later where something urgent shows up after you've already chosen your priority, and your old instinct is to abandon it immediately. When that happens, you'll know how to respond instead of freezing all over again. You're standing in your kitchen in the morning, coffee cooling on the counter, staring at your phone. Overnight messages, reminders, calendar alerts, half-finished notes from yesterday. You tell yourself you'll just get oriented before starting. 10 minutes later, you're still scrolling, and the day already feels behind. Here's the microscript to use the moment you notice a freeze. If I could only finish one thing today, what would it be? Say it once, and don't answer immediately. Look back at your list and let the question narrow it for you. This works because it cuts through false urgency. When everything feels important, nothing is actionable. Your brain isn't built to hold 10 competing priorities and calmly choose between them. It looks for escape instead. This question forces a trade-off. It doesn't ask what's ideal or impressive. It asks what actually changes the day if it gets done. Picture this in a familiar North American work setting. You sit down at your desk, open your task manager, and see emails, reports, follow-ups, errands, and loose ends from last week. You might start with the easiest task just to feel productive, or bounce between inbox and calendar trying to lower the anxiety. With this question, you stop. You scan the list and notice the one task that, if completed, reduces pressure everywhere else. You choose it, even if it's uncomfortable, and everything else becomes secondary. Here's the tiny action you can take today. Physically mark one task. Circle it. Start it. Highlight it. Then hide the rest of the list, close the app, turn the page, minimize the window. This is measurable. Either you reduced the list to one visible task or you didn't. Now slow this down for a brief practice. Take a breath through your nose and imagine yourself starting that one task without thinking about the rest. Notice the resistance. That resistance isn't evidence you chose wrong. It's the cost of clarity. Clarity always feels heavier at first because it removes your ability to delay. A common mistake here is confusing importance with urgency. Notifications, messages, and small requests scream for attention, while the task that actually matters often feels quiet and heavy. When you respond to urgency first, you stay busy but stuck. When you respond to importance first, urgency loses some of its power. Another version of this freeze shows up with personal tasks, finances, paperwork, health admin, things that don't feel rewarding but have consequences if ignored. You keep moving them from day to day because deciding where to start feels overwhelming. The correction is the same question. Not what should I do, but what finishes something. Why this works is simple. Completion restores agency. When you finish one meaningful task, your nervous system relaxes. You're no longer surrounded by open loops. Even if the rest of the list remains, it no longer owns your attention. Here's a short, slow practice moment you can do right now. Close your eyes for a second and imagine finishing that one task. Not perfectly. Just finished. Notice how your body feels when something is no longer pending. That feeling is what you're aiming for, not productivity theater, but relief. This matters later because once you've chosen a single priority, the world doesn't stop interrupting you. Emails come in. Requests pop up. New tasks appear. If you haven't anchored yourself to one clear win for the day, every interruption pulls you back into freeze. This question becomes the anchor you return to. As you move forward, you'll see what happens when choosing one task isn't enough, when you still avoid starting it because fear, perfectionism, or distraction creep in. That's where the next layer comes in, and where focus turns from decision into action. You finally sit down to work. The list is shorter now, just one task circled, but your cursor blinks on an empty document and nothing happens. Minutes pass. You reorganize your desk. You reread the task description. You check one more message real quick. The freeze is back, just quieter this time. The mistake here isn't that you chose the wrong priority. It's that you're treating the task as one solid block instead of a starting point. Your brain sees the whole thing at once and hesitates. Even one task can feel too big if it doesn't have a clear first step. The correction is simple and specific. You don't ask, how do I do this? You ask, what's the smallest visible action that moves this forward? Then you do only that. Here's the script, exactly as written. What is the first 2-minute action? You say it, then you answer it literally. Not the best step. Not the smartest step. The first one. This works because it shifts your brain from evaluation mode to motion. Freezing is rarely about laziness. It's about cognitive overload. When the next step is vague, your mind keeps scanning for certainty and finds none. A 2-minute action gives it something concrete to grab onto. Picture this in a familiar North American work scenario. You've chosen finish the report as your priority. You might try to outline the entire thing in your head before typing anything, feel overwhelmed, and stall. With this correction, the first 2-minute action might be open last week's notes or write the title and date. It feels almost too small, but once it's done, you're no longer stuck at zero. Here's the tiny action to take today. When you feel yourself pausing before starting, set a 2-minute timer and do only the first visible step. When the timer ends, you're allowed to stop. Often, you won't want to, but the permission matters. Now pause for a brief slow practice. Take a breath and imagine yourself starting something badly. Not efficiently. Not cleanly. Just started. Notice the tension around doing it right and let it loosen slightly. Focus isn't about elegance. It's about entry. Another version of this shows up outside of work. You've been avoiding a personal task, calling a bank, scheduling an appointment, dealing with paperwork. You keep telling yourself you'll do it when you have time, but the real issue is that the first step feels emotionally heavy. The correction is the same. Identify the first 2-minute action. Maybe it's finding the phone number. Maybe it's opening the form. You don't finish. You enter. Why this works is grounded in momentum. Once movement starts, your nervous system recalibrates. You're no longer facing an unknown, you're interacting with something real. Even if you stop after 2 minutes, the task feels more familiar next time, less threatening. Here's a quick pattern interrupt if you notice yourself overthinking the first step. Ask, could a reasonable person do this imperfectly? If the answer is yes, it's small enough. If not, break it down again. This matters later because the day won't stay clean. Interruptions will come. Energy will dip. If your focus depends on feeling motivated or confident, it won't last. But if it depends on identifying the next small action, you can restart again and again without drama. Notice the contrast now. Earlier, the list froze you because it was too big. Then a single priority gave you clarity. Now a small action gives you traction. Each layer removes one more reason to stall. As we move forward, the pressure increases. There will be moments where you've chosen the priority, identified the first step, and something urgent still tries to pull you away. That's where focus gets tested, not in quiet moments, but when competing demands show up and you have to decide whether to stay or switch. There's a belief that quietly sabotages your focus once the day is underway. If something urgent appears, I have to switch immediately. It sounds reasonable. Responsible, even. But under pressure, this belief keeps you scattered. You never stay with anything long enough to finish, and by the end of the day, you're exhausted without feeling accomplished. Here's the myth to bust: urgency does not automatically outrank importance. Most urgent is noise. If you treat every interruption as a command, your focus never stabilizes long enough to produce relief. The instruction when pressure hits is clear and narrow. You don't ignore the new task. You contain it. The script is this: I'll capture this and return to my current task. Then you actually do that, write it down, park it, and go back. This matters because focus isn't about resisting distraction through willpower. It's about deciding when something gets your attention. When you don't decide, everything decides for you. Picture this in a familiar North American work environment. You're halfway into your priority task, finally moving, when an email notification pops up marked urgent. Old habits pull you toward it immediately. You open it, skim, and suddenly you're replying, checking attachments, and mentally switching tracks. 10 minutes later, your original task feels heavier than before, and restarting feels costly. With this correction, you do something different. You glance, capture the request in a neutral place, a note, a task list, and you return to what you were doing. You don't decide now whether it matters. You decide later, at a boundary you control. This works because context switching is expensive. Every time you switch, your brain has to reload. You feel this as friction, fatigue, and avoidance. By containing interruptions instead of engaging them immediately, you protect the fragile momentum you've already built. Now slow this moment down for a brief practice. Imagine yourself noticing an interruption and feeling the impulse to switch. Instead of acting on it, you write one short line: handle X after the current task. Feel the slight discomfort of not responding right away, and notice that nothing breaks. The world keeps turning. The pressure drops. A common mistake here is telling yourself you'll just take a quick look. Quick looks rarely stay quick. They reopen loops and fragment your attention. Containment works because it closes the loop temporarily. Your brain relaxes when it knows the task isn't forgotten, it's parked. This also applies outside of work. You're cleaning, paying bills, or working on something personal, and a thought pops up: I should also do this. You might abandon what you're doing and start something else, leaving trails of half-finished tasks behind. With this instruction, you capture the thought and stay put. One thing finishes. Then the next begins. Here's a slow practice you can use today. When an interruption appears, put your hand flat on the table or your leg for a moment. That physical anchor reminds you where you are. Then capture the interruption in writing before you decide anything. This grounds your attention back in the present task. The stakes here are higher than productivity. When you constantly switch, your nervous system stays in a low-level state of alert. You never get the signal that something is done. That's why even easy days feel draining. Completion is calming. Switching delays completion indefinitely. There's a vignette coming where all of this collides: too many tasks, a clear priority, a small first step, and then a genuinely urgent interruption that feels impossible to ignore. The situation won't resolve neatly. The point won't be perfect focus. The point will be staying intentional instead of reactive when the pressure is real. That's where the skill proves itself, not when the day is quiet, but when it tries to pull you in 5 directions at once. You're halfway through the morning when it starts to go sideways. You sit down with your coffee, open your laptop, and glance at your list. There are more items than you'd like to admit. A deadline at work. A bill you've been avoiding. A message you still haven't answered. For a moment, the familiar freeze creeps in, your eyes move, your mind races, and nothing quite clicks into motion. The old reaction almost wins. You feel the urge to reorganize the list again, to make it look cleaner instead of making it shorter. You hover over your inbox, telling yourself you'll just clear a few messages first. That way, at least you'll feel productive. Then you stop. You remember the first move. You ask the question out loud, quietly but clearly: if I could only finish one thing today, what would it be? You scan the list again, slower this time. One task stands out. It's not the easiest, and it's not the most urgent sounding, but you know, if it gets done, the rest of the day loosens its grip. You circle it. Immediately, there's some relief, but not peace. The task still feels heavy. You sit there for a second, noticing the resistance in your body. Tight shoulders. Shallow breathing. This is usually where you stall. Instead, you shift to the next tool. What's the first 2-minute action, you ask? You don't overthink it. The answer is simple: open the document and paste in your notes from last week. That's it. You set a timer and do exactly that. When the 2 minutes are up, you notice something subtle. You're no longer at zero. The task feels slightly less abstract. You keep going, not because you forced yourself, but because starting removed some of the fear. Then the interruption hits. Your phone buzzes. An email pops up marked urgent. Your attention snaps toward it instantly. This is where, in the past, everything would unravel. You'd switch, tell yourself it's just for a moment, and lose the fragile momentum you just built. You pause. Hand flat on the desk. One breath. I'll capture this and return to my current task, you say quietly. You jot down a note, just enough to know you'll come back to it, and you close the email. The urge to switch lingers for a few seconds, uncomfortable but manageable. You stay. The old reaction almost pulls you again. A thought pops up: what if this really can't wait? You acknowledge it, but you don't follow it. You remind yourself that you're not ignoring anything, you're sequencing. You keep working. The task doesn't finish cleanly or quickly. There are moments where your focus wobbles and you feel tempted to check something else. Each time, you return to the same anchors: one task, one small step, interruptions captured but not acted on. An hour later, you lean back. The task isn't perfect, but it's done. Completely done. That matters. You notice how your body feels. Less tight. Less buzzy. The list hasn't vanished, but it no longer feels like a threat. You can see the next step without flinching. The day isn't over. New tasks will show up. You'll need to decide again later. But something important has shifted. You didn't let it overwhelm your choice. You stayed intentional under mild pressure, then moderate pressure, and finally real temptation. That's the improvement, not mastery, not a flawless day. Just clarity where there used to be paralysis. Motion where there used to be freeze. As you move into the rest of the day, you carry that with you. You know the noise will return. But now you also know how to cut through it, one decision, one step, one contained interruption at a time. What you've been practicing through this lesson is the difference between reacting to pressure and responding with intention. When your to-do list overwhelms you, reacting looks like freezing, avoiding, or bouncing between tasks without finishing anything. Responding looks like choosing deliberately, starting small, and staying put long enough to feel relief. The goal was never to control everything. It was to stop letting overload control you. First, you stepped into the exact moment where the list felt threatening and learned how to interrupt the freeze by choosing one task that would make the rest of the day easier. That single decision reduced noise and gave your attention somewhere to land. Then, you learned how to turn that decision into motion by identifying a first 2-minute action, instead of waiting to feel ready or confident. Next, you practiced protecting that fragile momentum by containing interruptions rather than reacting to them immediately. Finally, you saw how those tools work together in a real day where overwhelm tried to creep back in, but didn't fully take over. What connects all of this is simplicity. Focus doesn't come from doing more. It comes from removing unnecessary choices at the right moments. Each tool you practiced reduced one layer of friction, too many priorities, too big a task, and too many interruptions. When those layers fall away, action becomes possible again. Now let's lock this into something you can use today. First, write down one question from this lesson and keep it visible. Choose either "if I could only finish one thing today, what would it be?" or "what is the first 2-minute action?" Read it once before you start your workday. This primes your attention before overwhelm sets in. Second, complete one task fully today without switching. Choose your priority, start with the smallest visible step, and capture interruptions instead of following them. Measure success by completion, not speed. One finished task is enough. Third, practice containment once. The next time something urgent appears, write it down and return to what you were doing. Even if you only stay for 5 more minutes, you've trained yourself to decide instead of react. As you continue building this skill, the next layer to work on is internal resistance, the emotional pull to avoid important work even when you know exactly what to do. A logical follow-up lesson would be something like focus, how to start when you don't feel ready, because it deals with hesitation, fear, and perfectionism before they turn into delay. That's where focus becomes reliable, not just situational. You don't need a perfect system. You don't need endless motivation. What you're building is trust in your ability to choose and begin, even when the day feels crowded. When you can do that, your work becomes calmer, your stress drops, and progress stops feeling like a fight. If you want continued emotional control and focus that holds up under real pressure, not motivation, not noise, subscribe and keep building this skill.